3-1. Appreciate you guys jumping on tonight. So we got an interesting live stream talk about. A lot of stuff going around the world. Seems like we're on the cusp of World War III, and the world is going to hell in a handbasket. So if you've been living under a rock, Israelis have been attacked by Hamas. Calculated attack, came from the land, came from the sea, came from the air. And we're going to talk about that tonight and some different things. I kind of want to regiment this a little bit. We're going to talk about Israelis' intelligence failure, and then also want to hit how this all pertains to us here in the United States. So introducing our panelists tonight, going around a horn, we got first and foremost my good buddy Chad. Chad and I served together in the United States Marine Corps, Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines, went downrange to Afghanistan together back in 2010, 2011 time frame. And Chad is also a veteran of 1st LAR, was in the initial invasion of Iraq 2003, went back to 2004, hooked and jab in the Battle of Fallujah. Chad, thanks for jumping on tonight, brother.
Glad to be here.
All right. And I know some of you are going to be very excited to see this young man, Bruce at Camp Armament, a.k.a. Boomer Jr. Bruce has been in a hiatus. I don't know what he's been doing. I think he took some shrooms and ended up in Mexico for some period of time. But he's back. So, Bruce, welcome back, brother.
Thanks so much. Mexico's a good time, but I actually took 3 months off to grow out this fabulous beard. Look at that. Keep my face warm this winter. Glad to see you guys. Thanks for all the well wishes. It's good to be back.
Awesome. Next, No Stranger live stream. We got the good Les, Pegasus Test. That's his YouTube channel. Be sure to check him out. Les was a Marine, served in the early 90s. He's a veteran of the Gulf War, has his own logistics company as well as tactical training company. Les, thanks for jumping on tonight, brother.
Glad to be here, Brent.
All right. And returning to our stream, we got Logan. Logan served in the United States Army. He's essentially an intelligence expert, but he's been downrange Iraq and Afghanistan on multiple combat deployments, and he was on our last stream. But Logan, thanks for jumping on tonight, man.
Thanks for having me, brother.
All right, guys. That is our panel tonight. Before we kick this off, unfortunately, I don't have my maritime intelligence asset on here tonight, but I've got a ground intelligence asset. So, Logan, if you can give us a quick update on what's going on the ground in the Russo-Ukrainian war. You got the con.
Hey, thanks for having me on again. Yeah, if you can bring up the first slide, we'll go over the northeastern front first. There hasn't actually been a lot of movement along the front on the east or the south, mostly due to the weather changes. There's significant weather changes happening. The rains have come a little bit early in the northeast in Kharkiv Oblast, which is the region in the northeast connecting to the Luhansk People's Republic, so-called. As you can see, the city of Kupiansk there on the Oskol River, the Russians have pushed. They've done it probably about 37 attacks in the last 72 hours. 72 hours. There's been about 37 engagements with Ukrainian forces in the area, and they've actually been able to gain not significant territory, but for the size of forces they're using, they are getting a little bit more territory than expected. It's assessed that they're trying to push to the Oskol River to the west, and then basically wrap their forces around Kupiansk to the south and close on the Oskol River. It's basically the same playbook they always do for every city on the river. They're going to try to surround it and then squeeze it until they can form a corridor at the back, and they're going to use that to destroy Ukrainian forces as they try to retreat from the city. Next slide. You can see the blown up version of that. You can see at the very end of the of that salient there, where you see the orange and the pink connected together, you can see the city of Kupiansk is there, and you can see the gains that are made in orange along that front. They're going to probably continue to push slowly, grinding to the Oskol River to the west until they hit the Oskol River, and I think that is their final objective for this phase of their engagement before the rains actually get really bad. And as you know, in that region, the topsoil is about 6 to 8 feet thick. So you can imagine the mud that can be created with that kind of rain. Once that happens, all mechanized units will not be able to move, and most infantry can't move across the field to that point. So until the ground hardens after the freeze, then there's not going to be a lot of combat operations as far as maneuver. Probably a lot of fires, though. Next slide. On the southern front, you can see that Ukraine has continued to hold Robotine, which is the small settlement to the southwest of that blue space. And they've actually managed to go all the way to Verbovoye, which everybody thought was going to be impossible because it's gone back and forth about 3 or 4 times. And the Russians claim that they would hold Verbovoye in the outskirts. But the Russian forces fell back to Verbovoye, and you can see the settlement to the southeast of the blue area is Verbovoye. And the Ukrainians now hold the outskirts of the town, and under constant fires from the Russians, of course. To the west of that area, they made a push to Kopani again, and they made slightly some slight gains in the very far west of that blue space, as you can see from last week. But as the weather continues to degrade, there's not going to be a lot of ground operations, and I suspect that fires will vastly increase, especially from the Russian side. There'll probably be a lot more missile, rocket, and artillery fires placed on Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian positions, especially in the directions of Kupiansk and Robotine. I can give a little bit of update on the maritime situation. There is some more indications that Ukrainian special forces and their intelligence operatives are continuing to harass the Russian forces in the islands of the Black Sea and the coast of Crimea using what can only be described as sea-doos with support vessels. And they've managed to infiltrate significant amount of areas on those operations. I'll bring up some pictures next time, but you can look up Ukrainian special forces on sea-doos and jet skis just tearing it up. Any questions?
How long is the that season where it turns into deep mud and stuff and armor can't? Obviously, it's just gonna be a stalemate during that time. But when does it really start hardening up? And when that hardens up, are you expecting a renewed Russian offensive?
Yeah, they call it the Rasputitsa, which is kind of like a rainy season, muddy season, where after the harvest time that everybody kind of goes into like a dormant state until the mud is basically hardened, and that can happen at different times of the year. It's worse in Russia. People don't understand. They see Russia as like a huge area with a lot of resources, but their climate is much more unstable than Ukraine, and that's why Ukraine has been able to have such a good consistent harvest. The Russians did have a bumper crop this last year, but their climate is not anywhere close, and their soil quality is not anywhere close. And there's similar problems there with the mud, but it's not like Ukraine. It's pretty much on the money every year in Ukraine the same time of year. But the time of the freeze can change depending on just like conditions. Last year, I think it was around the middle of November when it became cold enough that the mud was hard. And then, of course, you saw that the Russians at that time had already set up their assembly areas in Belarus and Rostov-on-Don and those places, and they were freezing their asses off. But the Russians have actually, in the Kupiansk, I was looking at Kupiansk before, and I was assessing that they wouldn't actually kick anything off until probably maybe January or February, but it looks like maybe they're doing a lot more battalion size pushes, nothing bigger than a battalion. It looks like reconnaissance and force are testing the lines. But if you look at you can go to the live maps of any site, especially like the Study of War, where I got these maps from, and you can look at the lines of defenses in the Northeast, and they're not very significant. So you can guess that the forces that are going to be in that area are not going to be on the defensive, they're going to be on the offensive, because they really haven't made that many positions. In the South, they're probably going to be on the defense. We'll probably see some counterattacks, local counterattacks in the area, a lot of fires. A significant amount of aerial assets have been taken from the southern front to the eastern front, and they've been operating, they've been destroying the bridges on the rivers, they've been destroying depots, they've been destroying warehouses, every logistical node they can find in Kharkiv Oblast they're trying to destroy. And that can give credence to that they really want to degrade the strength of Ukrainian forces in the area. We'll probably see in the next couple of weeks what Ukraine decides to do with their forces. But as far as I know, the second line units that have been sent to the area are not their assault brigades or anything like that. They're really just holding in place, those kind of things. Yeah, we'll see in the next couple of weeks. Probably in the next week and a half, we'll see a little bit more activity from the Ukrainians, I hope.
Good deal. Does anybody have any follow-on comments before we move on to our topic?
I got one. I'm not sure if Logan can field this, but you have any comments on the grain shipments that Russia had planned to block, but it looks like they're going through anyway?
They actually haven't unblocked anything. There's been I can still see the vessels that have been posted. They I think it was a week ago, the news released that the ships out of Sevastopol, the Black Sea Fleet, had left the actual fleet areas, and everybody was saying it was because of the fires that were placed on Sevastopol and the drone attacks and everything else, probably sabotage, who knows, that they had the fleet go out into the water to avoid attacks. But I think they're just doing their normal thing. They're trying to shut down the ports. They're trying to blockade Odessa and other ports along the Black Sea, and they're going to make their presence felt. The Black Sea Fleet is still a significant threat to the area, and they haven't destroyed the whole thing. And I haven't seen any updates as far as where those ships are exactly, and they'll probably be massive. If you look at the Black Sea, the weather on the Black Sea right now, it's very foggy. So any fires from the Ukrainians is going to be hampered unless they're using some sort of like U.S. assets to do some sort of sensor or, target acquisition. But yeah, they're not allowing the grain shipments. They tried to do a deal with Turkey and it didn't work out, and that's why you saw the British say that they were going to send some destroyers to the area to escort grain shipments, and then they kind of backpedaled on that, as well as the promise to send troops to the Odessa area to secure the grain shipments. So UK government has kind of stepped back on some of the comments. I think maybe the defense minister of the UK made those statements as a litmus test to see what people would say, what their comments would be on the escalatory deployment of British troops in the region. But the British are in a desperate situation too, because they depend on a lot of trade from that area.
All right, let's move on to our topic. So obviously, lots going on in Israel. I don't think anybody saw this coming, but that's going to be essentially our topic for this conversation. Number one is the intelligence failure, because I'm sure all of us have been under the illusion that, the Israeli, intelligence game is pretty strong, right? So it's like, how in the world did they miss this coming? So who wants to pick this football up and run with it first?
Go, Les. As tradition states, I'll jump on the grenade to get it started. And while everybody's surprised at the intelligence failure, because it's very un-Israeli-like, there's actually historical precedence for this. Back during the Yom Kippur War, same thing, intelligence failure. The Israelis didn't pick up that the Egyptians had found a way to cross the canal and break through the Bar-Lev line. Well, same thing here. Looks like Hamas lulled the Israelis into a sense of false security. Launch a couple rockets every now and then. Iron Dome knocks it down. Kind of a little tit for tat, 5 o'clock Charlie kind of thing going on there. And they just massed their resources and bided their time. I'm sure there's absolutely no coincidence between this unleashing and Iran having an extra $600 billion to spend, but I digress. They were pretty innovative in their attacks, combined air, sea, and land attacks, bulldozing the gates, smart move, a non-military vehicle doing a very military task. Any fence in the world is going to be hard pressed to sustain an assault like that. And it worked. They got through. They had plenty of fighters to lead through that seem to be well equipped from the video that's out there. Give them props to the paraglider thing. Nobody expected that. I think you got to give the Israelis a pass for that. No one would have thought that was a thing. I've also seen pictures out there of the uh, Hamas fighters coming over and just plain parachutes. So I don't know if they jumped out of a plane, were parasailing and just coasted over, or jumped out of the paragliders. Don't know what that's about, but airborne assault. All right, give them credit. Never thought they had that capability. And there seems to be, although I haven't seen video of it, a word of seaborne assaults through the various vessels that go in and out of Gaza. So it was a very coordinated strike. They clearly bided their time, lulled the Israelis into a sense of complacency, and then proceeded to take advantage of it. They've seemed to inflict very heavy casualties at this point. There is word that Hezbollah up in the north has also kind of joined in the fun a little bit, but not a massive commitment to the battle yet from what we see. But this one's different, guys. I think this is gonna be big. This is gonna be bigger than Beirut in '82. This is gonna be bigger than the 2014 incursion. I think this is going to be along the lines of desperation like it was back in '73.
Well, I'll step in here and throw out, I think, what a lot of maybe some of the guys in chat are thinking about, and certainly some people are. I've got a friend, and he's kind of young to like the whole political side of how stuff unfolds and happens. So it's like watching your kid learn to ride a bike or learn to accomplish something. He's kind of learning this for the first time, and he'll bounce this stuff off of me, and I'm like, yeah. You know, we're talking about that in the '80s, but he's big on the military industrial complex, and particularly when it came to the Ukraine war. I guess that's probably more than anything what kind of got him involved, because it's his tax money that oftentimes is being spent, and people start to pay attention when money starts coming out of their own wallet and going to different things. So he started getting spun up on the military industrial complex, and it's sometimes insatiable diet to feed off of wars. And how we just wrapped up, we could say, Afghanistan, the giant debacle that it was. Right around the corner, what do you have? Boom, boom. You got the Ukraine war, right? And now you've got what certainly I think everybody probably agrees is going to be a real hot spot kicking off in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine. And to go to Brent's point of how did intelligence fail here? I don't conspire to this conspiracy theory yet, but I've certainly heard it quite a bit yesterday and today, that maybe they didn't fail. Maybe they intentionally let something happen because there's so many wheels that are greased by it. And there's so many wallets that are stuffed by it, so much money that starts changing hands by it. It's certainly going to put a lot more Americans to work building all kinds of things for the war effort, for a whole nother war effort. As if Ukraine wasn't enough, we now may be getting involved with Israel. We certainly are allies to Israel. We've sent a bunch of ships over there in show of support, and I'm sure that those are on standby to offer any assistance that may be needed on short notice, that may be a little bit beyond the scope of what Israel themselves can do. I think Israel is quite capable of protecting itself. However, resources only go so far. And whenever one ally of the United States needs resources, well, of all the countries in the world, they come to us with their handout. So I also agree a little bit with Les. I don't think we've seen anything like this happen around Israel since like Yom Kippur, right? Like this is a bigger deal than maybe a lot of people even realize and have let it sunk in. We'll be talking about this 6 months from now and probably a year from now. And the map of the Middle East, particularly around Palestine, might look quite a bit different a year from now. We'll come back and revisit it and see. But I just have a feeling, I could be wrong because I've been wrong on these things before, but Israel is to me, Israel's always looking for an opportunity to go in and smash the shit out of Palestine. And the rest of the world pulls back on their reins and says, no, don't do it. Nope, don't. You're killing too many kids and women on TV. Too much is happening. I think that they're gonna take advantage of this opportunity that they have now, and I think we're going to see some real movement on the ground and some property lines changing hands real soon.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. There is no question that this was a well-planned attack. I'm going to digress a little bit from the points of view that have already been expressed. I really don't think this is going to be any different than anything that happened in the past, at least strategically. Tactically, sure, the paramotor thing was pretty smart. But this conflict has been going on since the 1960s. But is this event really any different from anything we've seen in the past? I mean, yes, the attack, like I said, was highly complex, conducted on a larger scale, but I honestly don't see anything really changing. Hamas will continue to do its thing, that being target civilians while simultaneously hiding behind them, because quite frankly, that's all they've got. And Israel will likely take back the 20 plus miles of terrain under occupation, bomb some key targets, and possibly even go into Gaza and occupy it for a while until pressured to leave. And then there'll be a lull in activity so both sides can lick their wounds before the process starts all over again. Strategically, Israel is making strides in gathering allies in the Middle East. I know there's talks going on between the Saudis and Israelis now. But on the other hand, Hamas isn't really making too many new friends outside the same old players, Iran, Syria, smaller countries like Bahrain, Turkey, which isn't a small country. But back to the conflict, I think as an outsider looking in, this, like it's already been mentioned, this really has been an intelligence blunder on the part of Israel, as we will probably discuss. But they seem to go through these cycles, and Les kind of alluded to this, where they seem to get laxed, and then stuff like this happens. And the IDF is pretty spread thin already, especially in the South where this happened. There are a lot of parallels here between the 2006 Lebanon war and what's going on now. There are scholars out there, like, for example, Carmet Valenci, who argue that Hamas has taken many lessons from the Lebanese war, and now we're kind of seeing a parallel of that, where they're trying to engage in these large-scale operations. And now, as we saw in 2006, again, large-scale operation. But honestly, I don't think this back and forth is going to change either until Israel's destroyed, or maybe there's a regime change in Iran, who is the major backer of Hezbollah and Hamas. For my part in this conversation, I really want to focus on what is going on strategically here, and maybe some of the lessons we can extract from the conflict itself. Looking forward to the conversation.
My question is this similar to our intelligence failure on 9/11, right? So it's like, you look back on 9/11, you had, like, there was indications that this was going to take place, and some agencies were tracking it, right? And they're following up, but they weren't talking to each other. Like the CIA wasn't talking to the FBI, and, stuff like that. I wonder if you had that kind of situation going on here, because surely, and I don't know if you guys have been watching, if you go and find some of these like darker websites where you get the videos that are unedited, man, it's just mind blowing. One of these videos I saw, it looked like several IDF soldiers, like, in their barracks room, murdered, right? Completely caught off guard. And it's like, you look at the fortifications and stuff right there in these checkpoints and everything, like, these are not soft targets. These are hard targets. And they just were completely overran and just completely taken by surprise, which is just, it's unbelievably mind blowing. So.
No, not really, Brent. Just like in the Yom Kippur War, the Israelis on the Bar-Lev line got complacent. The Egyptians got across the canal, breached the barrier, established footholds, and the Israelis took a lot of casualties over the next 6-7 days, both in the air and on the ground, trying to reestablish the line, because they got caught with their pants so far down, the Egyptians were able to establish that strong of a foothold across. And it's the same thing. I think the Israelis just got lulled into a sense of complacency. They looked over the obvious things, figured, nothing happened yesterday, no, the week before, the day before, the month before, and they just got hit with a level of coordination that, quite frankly, we haven't seen Hamas demonstrate before. So they probably were underestimating their enemy, thinking they can't do this, because they never really have.
What you got, Logan?
I'm going to jump in. Being in the intelligence community, I can confidently say that I'm not in love with the Mossad or any other intelligence services. And they have the same problems that every other one does, and that is politicization of their intelligence services. And that can go anywhere. That can go to what we call like intelligence manipulation, where a certain politician wants to manipulate intelligence reports to verify his ideas or his policies, or it can go to anywhere from like ghostwriting, where an intelligence person will, for the purposes of getting a reputation or money or whatever, he'll just make up shit, honestly. And we've seen intelligence failures from the Israelis in the past, like you said, in Beirut, Les said. That was more before my time. But I remember 2006, and I remember the Israelis saying they were going to go in there and whip Hezbollah's ass, and they ended up getting their asses kicked in 2006, hard. And they weren't ready for the urban combat. They hadn't trained for it, and they went into prepared Hezbollah positions in the urban centers, and they just got wiped. And especially units like the Golani Brigade were reduced by over half, and even their special operations units failed almost in every single raid that they conducted. In this instance, we can see Hamas is done asymmetric warfare for the past 20, 30 years successfully, not on the scale, but like Les said, they have witnessed other forces. Let's say, for instance, ISIS in 2014. They made significant gains with significant amount of forces in a surprise attack in Iraq in 2014. Nobody saw that coming. Guys were taken by surprise. There was generals taken out of their beds. You can see the allusions to this in Israel. I don't see the Israelis as like a tier one force on the world stage. Realistically, most of their troops are reservists. As you saw in the last 24 hours, they activated the majority of their forces, which are reservists. They have some pretty well trained special operations forces, but they're small. And we saw their performance already in this conflict when they tried to go in and take a VIP out, and they ended up doing a public records release that said that they captured the deputy commander of the Southern Naval Fleet of Hamas, which, I mean, honestly, that is not very stupendous to me. And as you saw by their naval forces, that it's not like they're not going to gain significant intelligence from this guy. But they failed to capture every other VIP that they've tried to go after in this conflict over the past 48 hours. And they've had their aircraft shot down by Strela 2s. And they've really, other than their internal, security forces like their police and stuff like that inside Israel, kind of holding the line and reacting to these incursions and kind of, there's probably a lot of sleeper agents just sitting in the cities just waiting for this to happen. We kind of saw that, the Hamas in Iran and other places have been warning, hey, since you shut down the Al-Aqsa Mosque and kind of shamed the Palestinian people yet again, something was going to happen. And at that time, nothing really happened. So maybe they thought nothing was going to happen. But as far as the intelligence failure, I can say that you have to be very careful when you're running an enemy, let's say, double agent. In these kind of operations, it's not just gathering intelligence, because you know that this guy is embedded with the enemy, and there's a possibility that he could be working for them as well and feeding you disinformation or just running you, identifying your intelligence operatives, that kind of thing. In this instance, I can guess that evolved from just establishing double agent operations to conducting some sort of covert operations, as far as like trying to turn other guys that were related to these sources that the Israeli intelligence services had, and they were able to feed disinformation and basically bring in more false agents to these. I'm guessing they're these meetings or whatever, however they were contacting these sources, and they were really able to dupe these services into thinking that either something was going to happen later or something was never going to happen, or they had total control of these entities that were going to conduct the attack. I think that there's some people saying that it's conspiracy, like they wanted it to happen or something like that. I can't see that happening, because Israel is in a very bad situation right now. Gaza City is probably Fallujah times 1,000. There's millions of people that live in this city. It's been prepared for 3 decades for urban combat. And the only thing that Israel's gotten close to doing is maybe sending in some like very highly trained, like tier 1 guys to do raids there every once in a while, to do a snatch and grab or something. Other than that, it's been air power. And if they go into Gaza, imagine going into Fallujah with 1 million fighters in it. You know what I mean? And 300,000 Israeli reservists isn't going to be that force. I'm just being realistic.
Yeah, that's a great point. But I mean, it sounds like, from my perspective, just watching Israel's reaction right now, like they're going in full steam. I'm gonna go the opposite direction of what Chad was saying. It don't sound like they're gonna do business as normal. It sounds like they're gonna get some serious payback. So, with that being said, Chad, correct me if I'm wrong, but when I was at Abu Ghraib prison and heard you guys going into Fallujah, you guys are blowing the living fuck out of that place with 155s and 25 Mike. I could hear it.
It was a beautiful fireworks show.
So it makes me wonder if Israel is going to do that Fallujah style offensive into their. I mean, they're going to take some gloves off. It looks like just looking at their prime minister speech today. To me, it looks like they're going for some payback.
Well,
yeah, it's the Israeli response. If you look throughout history, all the way back into the 1960s, when the PLO really started to amp up its activities, the Israelis always over-respond to the incident. If they shoot up a bus full of school children, the Israelis come down and take down a whole building. If they blow up a car, the Israelis bomb a parking lot full of cars. It's just one of those things. So this is a pretty big offensive. Yeah, I expect to see Israel occupy Gaza, and if they can't hold it, they'll level it.
Yeah, I think that is probably that's what the people of Israel want, the citizens of Israel, and probably a large part of their political base and their Knesset. However, you have to look what's happened in the last 12 hours. You saw the response from Hamas was, we're going to murder and execute an Israeli settler that we've captured for every single bomb that you fire at a building. So right now, Netanyahu is not looking too good because his response has been, like you said, Les. He's overplayed his hand. So every bomb that now hits is going to kill an Israeli citizen. And as you can see, there's not that many Israeli citizens. And also, could they go and flatten Gaza? Yes. However, doing that would bring other countries into the conflict. How do you avoid the Egyptian army on the southern front of that city? How do you ignore Hezbollah on the northern front? How do you ignore Iran? How do you ignore other Arab countries? If you flatten
All valid
Gaza,
points.
it will be a call to war for all these other countries to come in. And as we've seen already in the past 6 months, these dominoes are starting to fall. And if Israel decides to do that, they will be the ones that will cause global conflict.
yeah, Logan, I couldn't agree more. I mean, right now, Gaza is sort of alone in this. The West Bank is fairly quiet right now, but hey, that could change. Like you said, the northern sector along the Lebanese border is quiet for now. I mean, outside of the few rocket attacks they've made since it started, but I mean, Israel's surrounded. Syria's nearby. Iran is financially backing them, and we haven't even gotten to who's backing Iran. China and Iranian foreign relations are pretty tight right now. So, I mean, we can go there later, but yeah, I absolutely agree with you 100%.
I think to Logan's point, don't disagree, but you also can't allow it to go unchecked. Because if you allow an attack like that to go unchecked, then there's just going to encourage more attacks like that, right? And maybe not just in Israel, but maybe in other places. Again, sort of building up the morale and confidence of other countries that are thinking about doing something similar. And different areas of the world. They may not even be Muslim countries. You have to show that if you attack a country, that you pay absolutely dearly for it. I don't like the idea of this whole hostage thing. I don't like it when the United States does it and gives other countries money for hostages. I think it's just a bad policy. I mean, to say, hey, well, whether it's an individual hostage here in the States and the guy's demanding $1 million in his bank account, we don't do that because we know what comes from that. And I think that the lesson to be learned here is don't become a hostage. And that brings into a whole lot of other issues about these hostages not having the right mindset, not being armed, not being prepared to protect themselves. A lot of them are just kids or girls just listening to their music, going about their lives, oblivious to the dangers that are out there. I think that's a problem to create that mindset in a country, whether it's Israel or whether it's ours. But that if you take hostages, then there should absolutely be rescue attempts. But at the same time, I think the whole country has to understand that those lives most likely will be lost, because you can't let one country invade into another, take a bunch of hostages, and then say there's going to be no repercussions from that. And as a matter of fact, we're going to pay you to get those hostages back. I just think that's a terrible precedent for a country to set. And I don't think Israel is going to do that. And I don't think Netanyahu is going to do that. Although, these are political decisions to be made, not necessarily moral decisions or decisions made from a position of strength. And that always complicates things.
Hey, I want to point out though, like every time I see an IDF like general or some high-ranking official talking about this, like they are comparing this to Pearl Harbor. They are comparing this to 9/11. Like they're not talking about some like the hostage situations they've had in the past in historical sense. They are comparing this to 9/11, December 7th, 6-Day War, Yom Kippur War. Like they are looking at this, and I mean they've declared war. So I don't think this is going to be a measured response. I think they're going full force, man. So I remember before the Russian invasion for Ukraine, like we were kicking this around, and like I mean back then you couldn't even fathom like the Russians full on invading Ukraine, and most of us were like, oh yeah, it's not going to happen, like, and then it happens, and we're like, oh fuck. So at this point, like I'm watching some of these videos I've watched, in the tactics employed by Hamas and what they did. And like, you got Israeli women being, thrown in the back of Jeeps, bloodied and bashed and driven into. Like, Israel is not going to fucking take that lightly. They are coming for blood, and I can't remember if it was the prime minister who said this or one of their defense ministers, but they're like, they're going to feel this for generations, our retaliation.
Also, you have to look at one thing. The Gaza Strip's been occupied since the 6-Day War. And it was occupied up, I think, until the early 2000s and stuff. They had the Intifada and all that, but for the most part, when they occupied it, they didn't have problems. So there's probably Israel looking at the history of that and considering that as a possible option. The other thing is, while the Arab nations have solidarity with the Palestinians, they don't like them either. Notice the Arab nations do not take in Palestinians as refugees. They get uppity there on the southern border of Gaza there. The Egyptians handle it. You don't see the Saudis, the Bahrainis, the Kuwaitis, the Qataris, the UAE taking in big swaths of Palestinians as refugees. Nope. They let them stay there in the squalor of Gaza, the most densely populated place on planet Earth. They don't do much. They don't like Israel. So the Palestinians causing Israel a problem doesn't bother them, but they don't exactly care about the Palestinians that much.
Yeah, I think the point is that nobody really cares about the Palestinians. And the UN has cut off all aid to Palestine. The Israelis have shut off the power. There's going to be a huge humanitarian crisis. And those people are going to spill out probably to adjacent countries. And that is another, consideration on the battlefield of all these refugees and movement of people. And as you said, Les, like the King the King Faisal of Saudi Arabia is pro-Palestinian, but he is like in dementia already, and his son MBS does not give a fuck about the Palestinians. He said
And
such.
he's blatantly said that pretty much.
Yes, yes. And Hezbollah is a proxy force of Iran, and Hamas. The leaders of Hamas have met with, you know, the Ministry of Defense of Russia quite a bit in the last 6 to 12 months. So you can imagine that maybe this incursion has something to do with diverting aid from certain countries in Eastern Europe. As you saw, the U.S. has sent a carrier strike group to the Mediterranean, and if I was the U.S., I would as well, because what happened in 1967 when we sent an observing force to the Mediterranean? Everybody remembers the USS Liberty. I do. And I I still look at the Israelis with skepticism and distrust, especially because they really haven't helped us in our wars, if you think about it. And everybody's been making jokes about the dancing Americans in this situation, but, you know, I think that we really need to think about our position in this upcoming escalatory fight. I think the Arab nations are looking at it as an opportunity. Iran seems to be stepping back from the situation and evaluating their own defenses. Their defense minister came out and said that they needed to do a bunch of tests to evaluate their missile defense in case they were fired upon. And I think that Saudi Arabia at some point during a certain administration was receiving intelligence from us via Israel, which of course pissed off the Israelis. And they're looking to normalize relations with Israel, but now that has been put on hold.
Bruce, I got that comment if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, throw it up because we are following the chat, guys, as much as we can. So this is an interesting comment. The attack was a false flag in order to evict Palestinians from the land permanently or genocide them if they won't leave. The only problem with that is that it's not a false flag. It's a great comment, but these weren't Jews dressed up like Palestinians flying across in hang gliders and motorcycles, killing a bunch of Jews to draw Israel into the war. I mean, this was I haven't heard a single report that hints that these weren't Hamas and Palestinians and Muslims that crossed the border into Israel to kill Israeli soldiers and civilians. That wouldn't be a false flag. Maybe as close as you and I can get on this is the conspiracy theory that the intelligence community either failed or didn't act and had some culpability in allowing it to happen. But that's a bit of a stretch from a false flag.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I think the hate of both sides is so palpable towards each other. Neither would need a false flag. I doubt that you could go into Palestine and sit there and convince a bunch of people to go attack Israel. I'm sure that's not a hard sell. And vice versa, with certain elements of the Israelis sitting there convincing them to go in and flatten Gaza, not a hard argument to make, especially today.
Yeah, and to Luke's point, I just want to say this real quick because just go back for a minute. But he mentioned that Gaza has been built up into a major defensive city, and that they have the ability. Yes, that's something I think that Israel needs to pay attention to as well. Hamas is not going to launch this attack. Number one, Hamas had no aspirations to take over Israel. They couldn't do that. They knew they couldn't possibly do that. So they knew Israel was going to launch a major counterattack. And Israel needs to be very careful about falling into that trap, because I am sure there is a trap there somewhere, whether it works or not. Now that's up to the Israelis, but I am sure Hamas knows that they're coming into Gaza and they're coming in hard and heavy, and they're going to not just sit there and take it lightly. There's some kind of plan that's going to unfold in the next couple of weeks that we'll all be able to see.
Yeah, I want to expand on that a little bit, Bruce. I'm glad you brought that up. So yeah, we've talked about Israel for most of this conversation, but what about the other side? And I want to dive into Hamas for a second, because I what they're trying to achieve here specifically, I find very interesting. I don't think they're under any illusions that a large-scale rocket attack and commando-style infiltrations on paragliders will defeat IDF or the Israelis' will to fight. Trigger warning, I'm about to go on a rant here. So what is their purpose here? I think there's always been some higher political goal with stunts like this. And I would argue that the primary goal, as it is in most insurgencies in the past involving non-state actors, is to delegitimize the opposing state. You know, the 20th century gave us many examples of this. Castro and Che in Cuba fighting off the Batista regime, Viet Cong in South Vietnam. The goal was to delegitimize the opposing government, and it often works. On a side note, there is some historical evidence that various leaders from the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, did in fact visit China and Vietnam during the 1960s and 70s in hopes of understanding a Maoist-type insurgency. In fact, I think one of their leaders, Khalil al-Wazir, the man who directed military operations for the PLO Nationalist Party called Fatah, which now occupies the West Bank, actually visited North Vietnam and was a guest of North Vietnamese General Vo Nguyen Giap as early as 1964 to study guerrilla warfare. So it's interesting. There's some continuity in that. But digressing a little bit from that, now I know the PLO and Hamas are political rivals, but the PLO, particularly Fatah, was a militant organization up to the early 1990s. And I would venture to say that Hamas learned a lot from Fatah during those militant days. So yes, I would say that Hamas, Hezbollah, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Palestinian Popular Front, all those so-called liberation organizations are fighting a Maoist-type insurgency. So what is the major political ambition of Maoist revolutionary strategy? That's easy. Delegitimize the opposing state. How do you accomplish this? Well, in short, reaction is the goal. And Bruce, you just mentioned this. What does that mean? It means that Israel's reaction to Hamas's action is the goal. They're hoping for some huge, like you guys are saying, this huge blown out response, leveling Gaza. They're hoping for that. That's what they want, to foster support for their cause. And then they can point to it and say, hey, we're victims. And we have a Democratic Party in power now. You know, Joe Biden has been an absolute disaster. He didn't want to go even into Pakistan and get Osama bin Laden. So I'm not sure how much support from us they can get. Truly, I know we sent some forces over there, but is that really going to be the extent of our support? Who knows? But they want to detract support from Israel and gain support for themselves. The problem for Israel will be coming out of this with minimal political and diplomatic damage. And I've already mentioned Biden, and you see the Democrat Party tweets, especially from the squad, almost borderline in support of Palestine, but condemning violence, you know. So the next few months are going to be interesting. And I'll conclude with this. Wars like this are very hard to fight. In fact, one Vietnam war scholar named Douglas Pike famously stated, there is no effective counterinsurgency strategy or counter strategy to this type of insurgency. So I guess we'll see if this prediction is correct. Rant over.
Nice, Chad. Yeah, I agree with you on the strategic and global perspective for sure. Operationally, if I was a Palestinian militant who had experience fighting in the last Syrian civil war, and you wanted to destroy the IDF, would you attack the IDF directly? No. As marginally trained as the IDF is, they're still hard to defeat based on their fires. So if you want to defeat them, this is probably the best way. You'd bypass them. You'd completely bypass the IDF in their positions. Attack their civilians, take hostages, do a classic raid, take them back to your little castle, and then you just sit in your castle and wait. And you're going to have all these IDF guys throwing themselves at Gaza City. It's going to be like Grozny. I'm just predicting that. Most of these guys haven't fought. If they have fought, maybe some of their officers and NCOs maybe fought in the 2006 war. But other than that, they haven't done jack, man. And their war experience is very limited. The reservists are going to come in with the same marginal amount of training. And that's exactly how I would want to fight the IDF.
All right, I want to
go ahead, Brent.
real
Sorry.
quick, just because you brought up, like training and everything. So, I don't know if you guys watched this, but like some of the videos from, like the Hamas troops, approaching, like they're moving in formations, right? Like they're pine corners. Like these dudes have had training, significant training, and they've obviously done that under the nose of the Israelis. So I think Chad brought up, the Biden administration recently unfroze, like, what was it, like $6 billion to the Iranians? Like, this is all coming on the heels of that, right? So we all know that the Iranians support Hamas. So I'm gonna pose a question here, like, is the scope of this declared war going to be only within that on Hamas there, or are we going to see strikes into Iran? Because it's not outside the realm of possibility. The Israelis have absolutely reached out and touched other nations before. So I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on that? Because if you got Israeli aircraft bombing Iranians, I mean, clearly they're supporting Hamas.
Well, let's talk about how Iran actually supports Hamas. They have several units within the Al-Quds IRGC, which roughly have the same mission as our Green Berets. They are advise and assist, and they arm and train these militants to conduct asymmetric warfare operations.
Do they do that in their own country, or do they do that in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look up IRGC Al-Quds Unit 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. They're all almost like saying, like 1,000 Special Forces Group Green Berets. They're basically the same thing. And if you look at their operations in Iraq back then in 2004 when we were there, Brent and Chad, you can see the significant change from April of 2004 when I first started fighting JAM, and then when you guys were there later on the next year too. You remember the Golden Groups, the new Jaish al-Mahdi, the Mahdi Army, all these other splinter groups that were highly trained, armed with the latest 50 cal sniper rifles, drones, everything you can think of, EFPs, everything. That is what IRGC Al-Quds units do. And have they moved these guys, the guys that we saw in the videos, have they moved them back and forth from Syria over and over? Of course they have. Part of the mission of the unit is to basically move these guys around so they can get training, so they can get experience. A lot of these guys have fought against the Assad regime. They have fought against the Russians. They have fought against. I mean, some of them have fought for the Russians and Assad as well. I mean, it just depends. But these guys are the same guys that are crossing the border. You can see in their experience, they are using bounding, maneuvering. They're entering in. They're not just running through the gates in a mob. They're using, a support by fire. I mean, look at them.
No, it's all great points, Logan. It was clear that any video I've seen of them maneuvering, it's a force that's had some training. It's clearly that they've done that. You're also right about the Israelis and their combat experience. From the time of the War of Independence, pretty much to the end of the Lebanon occupation, Israeli troops were in some form of constant combat. They've had a good 20-year cycle of not really. So a lot of that combat hardness is lost. It is a softer society. You all have to remember that Israel was formed by the people who survived the Holocaust. So they'd already put up with a lot of shit. And the traditional thing goes, the generation wants to make their offspring have an easier life. And you got to give the Israelis credit. They have achieved that. One of the most significant things you notice when you go to Israel, you can tell Israeli territory from Palestinian territory very easy. One's literally green and the other is not. They've literally transformed their landscape. They have improved their lot in life, maybe at the expense of the other group, not denying that. But they have made life easy for themselves, and they have gotten soft. And I can't speak to the current training of the IDF because I don't know anybody in it currently, but it does stand to reason that without recent combat experience, things have slipped. And Israel probably will pay a high price when they go into Gaza, as you said.
All right. We're almost at the hour mark, and I think the next part of this conversation is going to be pretty vast. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce it here. And that is, how does this pertain to us? And I mean, just watching this, guys, like I've seen a lot of stuff that's like, this is 100% applicable to us. All right. I'm just going to throw out a few things and you guys can run with this. Okay. So first and foremost, we have seen countless examples over the last freaking several decades where low tech has beaten high tech, right? We've already talked about the paragliders. Like, who in the fuck would have thought about that, right? So you have Israel with Iron Dome. They can intercept all these, rockets and missiles and all sort of stuff. But yet you have armed like squads flying over in paragliders, and that's how they attack from the air and they infiltrate, right? You have dudes taking out Israeli armor, and dragging out the crews. Like, you have infantry essentially accomplishing a vast array of tasks and infiltrating deeply, coming in on, essentially Zodiac boats. Just all this, right? So like, I look at this and I think here Israel, they got concrete towers. They got giant freaking beautiful walls that make President Trump, jealous. And here, this stuff was all compromised by these insurgents, right? These terrorist cells. Can you imagine, for an instance, if we start our own war against cartels down south, right? We start sending special forces down there and blowing up, like some of the presidential candidates have talked about. You don't think they're not going to take a playbook, play a Hamas playbook here? I mean, our border is nothing like that of the IDF's, and look what they managed to do. But the flip side of that is, here's a Second Amendment argument, right? This is twice now we've seen in two conflicts where a Second Amendment would have made a huge difference, right? So my understanding of Israel is like, they have policies where you can't own a firearm, but you're limited to like 50 rounds or something. That was one of the things I saw. So if somebody's more educated on that, enlighten me. But it didn't look like there was a lot of Second Amendment action taking place during some of this, because you're watching cell phone video of people up in apartments and they're literally looking at Hamas, squads walking down the street in plain view, and they're just, all they can do is sit there and film them. So I'll open it up the floor, guys. I think this will be an interesting topic to kick around.
Yeah, if I could hit your one comment there about Second Amendment in Israel, as owning an international transportation company that does specialize in the transport of firearms. In Israel, pistols are a thing, and you can own one. You can own one pistol, and I heard today they raised it from 50 to 100 rounds that you could have, and a ton of testing that goes with it. And from what I also say, and I'm not 100% sure because I've heard different things from different vendors, your military service doesn't count towards the requirements of training that they have. So it's very restricted. Nobody has a rifle. Nobody has a shotgun. And for the few people that do have them, it's like incredibly specific reasons. It's like trying to get a concealed carry permit in New York City. You can do it, but it's really hard. I agree with you, Brent, that if they had a Second Amendment, that would have changed a lot. And I think Israel needs to learn that lesson hard. I think Ukraine learned it the hard way and it hasn't taken it to heart, because I've heard they've started collecting arms back up that they gave out. And if there's someone who really needs to learn the lesson for it to make a difference, it's the Taiwanese. And that's probably the best aid we could give them. This administration won't give it to them, but literally that would be one of the hooks you tie any aid to Israel with. Oh, you need new fighter jets? Fine. You're buying 100,000 AR-15s to give out to your people, right? That's the best weapon we can encourage them to take. They're very restricted. I hope they learn the lesson from this.
They won't, Les. They won't.
Sadly, you're probably right, Bruce.
I mean, think about, you just said it yourself. How was Israel formed? A bunch of Jews that survived the Holocaust. How fucking stupid are they? Did they go from that and decide, hey, we're not going to encourage people to arm themselves and protect themselves from something bad that may happen sometime in the future that we don't foresee, exactly like it did in the 1930s? Maybe they're just a stupid group of people. I mean, tell me that I'm wrong. I mean, we learned it
I'll
as
tell you they're
Americans
complacent.
very early on from far less of any type of consequence than the Jews saw during World War II. Everyone will agree on that. Everyone in the world knows about the Holocaust. I mean, it's common knowledge in pretty much so every school anywhere in any Western country anyway. And they're gonna say you get a handgun with 50 rounds of ammunition. Well, if anything, this should be proof to us as Americans that guys like, I'm going to use a David Hogg quote. Everybody knows the anti-gun David Hogg, that thinks a handgun with 10 rounds is all that you need. Well, that's not going to work if you're on a fourth story floor looking down at a military group like Hamas coming through your street. Even I know that. Even if I saw that, I'm like, man, this is not going to end well for me if I've got 50 rounds and a handgun and those guys are down there with AKs and body armor. So what can we learn from this? Well, we've learned a lot. And I wish Israel was in the same situation and every country was in the same situation. It takes more than just the Second Amendment in Israel, though. It takes a pro-firearm mindset, much like much of the United States has. I know we're pretty divided on that. But for those of us that are aware and are armed every day, every one of us here, and I won't speak for Logan, but I bet you are, probably a pro-gun guy. You probably got a few in a gun safe somewhere. You probably an active shooter and keep your shit wiretight, and probably think of that as being able to protect your family. And it's probably more than just a handgun with 50 rounds of ammunition. I mean, I know for most of it is. It's a mindset as well. We have that mindset in this country, or at least in a lot of parts of this country, and it takes that in another country too, not just a Second Amendment if someone's not exercising it.
Another thing I will add, talking to some of the gun shops I do work with in Israel and stuff, one of the things they also told me, in addition, you can only have a pistol and 50 rounds and only one. If you want a different one, you got to get rid of the one you got. Part of their rules come from the fact that if you're a citizen in Israel, you're a citizen in Israel, regardless of your religious affiliation. So there are lots of non-Jewish people living in Israel, and the law is somewhat racist to keep them from being armed.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. And, as far as the Second Amendment goes, behind every blade of grass is a guy trying to get his budget AR to cycle, right? And it's like you said, Les, there's a significant part of the population of Israel that is Palestinian, Bedouin, other people, Christians, some of them, and they are stuck in that Jim Crow era of developing, with like the same way we developed our gun control to keep Mexicans and black people from owning guns. That's the same reason. And they want to have that suppression of gun rights and other rights, rights to free speech and everything else goes along with that when you have limited Second Amendment rights. And yes, I am an ardent supporter of the Second Amendment, and I will never say what I have. But Brent probably knows. I think that the way this affects us ultimately is we have to look at the intelligence that came about, and really, if you guys look in the past 2 weeks, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if you look in the past 2 weeks, there was a lot of defense contractors that their stocks went up. And does Israel have the best intelligence services, or do they get fed intelligence from our services? And I will not answer that question, but I think you can know the answer. If there's politicians in the United States that knew this was going to happen, then they don't have any motivation to change it or let the Israelis know. And a lot of what the Israelis, pump their chests up about is, their military capability and their intelligence, which both of those things come from the United States. And have we promised to, send them more arms or whatever? Yes, I think the Biden administration put out a $1 billion plan or something. But I think, honestly, that the U.S. will be unable to commit an intervention in this particular conflict because Israel is not part of any giant alliance like NATO, that we don't have any actual standing orders to interfere in any defensive war with Israel. We don't have any other than the guys that have been infiltrating DC as lobbyists for Israel for such a long time. We don't have any real defensive pacts with Israel that we will come to their defense ultimately, like NATO. But if you look at the U.S. policy for Palestinians and Israel fighting each other, they see it as an internal political conflict. They don't see it as an outside aggressor because really, realistically, and probably some of these people will agree with me, Israel is actually the aggressor in this instance. This is territory that has been taken from the Palestinians or whoever was there for before, Ottomans, before that. They really have pushed the Palestinians into a corner. And the Israeli generals and the politicians saying, "Oh, you need to leave Gaza. We're going to, destroy Gaza, so you need to leave." Where are these people going to go? Into the sea, I guess. They better start swimming because they cannot leave into Israel. They cannot leave into Egypt. And I think that the Palestinians are going to be on their own, but also I think the Israelis are going to be on their own in this instance. Maybe some will disagree with me.
Yeah, that's a solid point, Logan. I think the support they'll get from the United States will be material. I can guarantee you, if it comes down with a tank that needs to be transferred over there, and you have to choose between Ukraine and Israel, Israel's going to win hands down. The American public will rally behind that. As far as large-scale intervention, unless it gets to Yom Kippur levels, where you have literally Air Force squadrons from Seymour Johnson landing at Ben Gurion, and the Israelis run out, paint over the U.S. stars and stripes, put a Star of David on it, and it goes into battle with its U.S. tailcoat still on the plane. I don't think you'll see that unless you see active Arab armies invading, which I do not expect to see in this one.
I'm curious, Bruce. Somebody just said that you ranked up from Boomer Jr. to Armchair General. What was your comment?
I'm not exactly sure what they're referring to, but hey, any rank up in this man's army, man, I'll take it, man. More days off and a little more pay. Yep, I'm all about it. Sometimes, there's a few comments, right, and they come in slow, so I'm not exactly sure what it was related to, but I get a chuckle out of it. I love the love, guys. I love it.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a lot of questions in the chat. I wish there was more questions, but
there's literally 483 viewers right now. So
you have to create a question out of someone's angry comment, but it's easy to do when you get good at it.
In this era, like you said, like there's a lot of asymmetric warfare that's gone on since the revolutionary times of the 1950s and 1960s. And like Chad said, you don't actually have to defeat an army anymore. You just have to defeat the people that live in that country, and defeat their will to fight. But especially like since 2022, it is the will of any country now to take what they want. It's all about power now. So realistically, everybody's saying, something like, my God gave me this land, or my God gave me this land. It's really like whoever can take the land will have it. And with the examples of the past couple of years, countries can take territory and sovereignly claim it through a third party. And the democracies of the world and the systems we have set up in the UN and other places, the international community, can't do shit about it.
Yeah, let's not forget what yesterday was. It was National Indigenous Peoples Day. Speaking of taking land from people because we want it, I'm not sure why they're called indigenous people, because I learned they came over the Bering Land Bridge from Mongolia. That's not indigenous, but hey, I digress. Whatever you want to call the holiday to have your day off. But you're absolutely right, Logan.
I'm actually an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain tribe of Chippewa Indians. My mother's Apache.
What part of Mongolia did you come from?
The Ukrainians asked me the same exact question.
You're kidding me. They learned that too.
No, they see my features are very Siberian looking, just like.
Oh, I got it. Okay, all right. So
they
asked,
what?
I'm part. My mom always said I was part Comanche because high cheekbones.
Your grandmother was the Cherokee princess. Is that what you said?
No, it went back so much farther than that. Nobody knows. But when I was a kid, my mom would always tell me that we got high cheekbones because there's Indians back there somewhere in the foothills of Georgia. But it's certainly all bullshit. But it was a great story when I was a kid.
All Americans have Indian blood.
Let's all not forget that, when the evil white man landed in America, that all the native tribes were, like Disneyland, like singing "It's a Small World After All."
Very peaceful groups.
Yes,
got along
yeah.
real well.
None of them were fighting with each other or
No,
killing each other or
none of
taking
that.
their.
No,
Anyway,
finally some questions.
Bottom line is, when you're in a war, you win. If you win stuff. If you lose stuff. That's been the trend throughout human history. I want to traverse for a moment and draw some attention to the elephant in the room, so to speak. Les, you mentioned Taiwan, rightfully so. I think this conflict in Israel might highlight a bigger issue for us, especially with regards to Taiwan. And Logan, I'd also be interested to hear your thoughts as a member of the Intel community. For those who don't know, in March of 2021, Iran and China cemented relations by signing a 25-year strategic partnership. This agreement guaranteed China access to Iranian oil, and in return, China.
I think we lost him.
The agreement would guarantee Chinese access to Iranian oil, and in return, China would invest $400 billion in Iranian infrastructure, establish intelligence partnerships, as well as agreements to cooperate with Russia, Syria, and Lebanon to establish oil pipelines. Most importantly, it would include provisions for military, defense, and security cooperation. So what does this mean? Well, Iran funds Hamas and Hezbollah. This means that there are some strategic ramifications, especially for us. Any American involvement in this conflict, be it monetary, logistics, or boots on the ground, will probably work in favor of the Chinese. China has made a weak condemnation of Hamas this past weekend. So I'd really like to know, how much funding China is making towards these terrorist organizations with the intent of stretching us thin. So I open up to the group. How might this conflict affect us strategically in future conflicts?
Hey, real quick before you answer that, Winter Warfare, he just did a $50 super chat. Thanks, brother. If you guys don't know Winter Warfare, he's got his own website, veteran-owned, fantastic individual. Check him out. So carry on.
Yeah, well, to fill the one super chat comment about, is the panel opposed to American boots on the ground in Ukraine and Israel? I see no need for it. I've said on these live streams a lot in the past that if anything, the United States should be the arsenal of democracy. Still hold to that. Being the arsenal of democracy means I got all the stuff you need. I'm not sending my guys. And if you look at the history of the Arab-Israeli War since the 1948 War of Independence of Israel, they never asked for our help. Matter of fact, during the Gulf War, we kind of had to hold them back to the point of Lawrence Eagleburger going there, laying out the intelligence, saying, if you want something in Iraq bombed, tell us what it is. We'll hit the target for you. So I don't think the Israelis will even ask for us. But they will ask for supplies, just like Ukraine is. I can't think of a conflict since the end of the Second World War where we had an interest in where we didn't provide the supplies for it. So I think that will continue to happen, but I don't think we'll see boots on the ground. It's not popular with the American public, and I don't think that it would really make that much of a difference on either side, to be honest.
Agree 100%, Les. I think that with all of these wars, sort of since Afghanistan, and let's face it, the whole Iraq-Afghanistan thing really stemmed from 9/11, right? Our own land being attacked, and we took all of our differences then between Republicans, Democrats, whatever, put them aside, and we mobilized and militarized, and we went to war in a very quick, serious fashion. That's really wrapped up now. And there's not a lot of appetite in this country to go to war in Ukraine. There's not a lot of appetite to go to war in Israel. I don't know that there's a lot of appetite to go to war anywhere right now. Should other conflicts pop up tomorrow? I think what there is an appetite for is funding and drones and missiles and attacks where American bodies aren't coming home. Americans aren't losing eyes and limbs. There seems to be an appetite for that. And it also strangely seems as soon as that appetite starts to chill a little bit, like we've just seen in our Congress here recently, when there's fewer and fewer supporters, particularly on the Republican side, but this stuff is contagious for the Ukraine war. Now we got a new one. Now we got a new war to fund, right? Boom, just like that, we got a new one. And so this goes to a super chat, I think, that was thrown out there that was basically like, where do we see Congress, with their budget in 40 days? How is this going to impact us? Right back to Brent's topic of discussion, how does this impact us? Well, it impacts one thing that all of you have got, your pocketbook and your wallet. Just means you're going to have to keep forking that out, because we will continue to support not just Ukraine, but now we're going to support Israel on this. They'll come up with a cool name for it. Don't worry. I'm sure it's already being like group tested. They'll call it something like the Global War on Terror, but it'll be even a little bit cooler, a little bit more woke. But we'll be doing that in Ukraine and Israel. We'll bundle them together so that Zelensky still gets his money, but also we got money going over to Netanyahu. We'll make the funds happen. All right. We'll get them the money that they need. But I think boots on the ground is going to be a bridge too far, with except for the little secret covert guys that we got that Logan won't talk about. But for your general infantry, that's not going to be happening over there unless something like serious major happens here in this country. That's kind of what gets us behind those things.
You're right. You're right. As far as boots on the ground, we just don't have to. We have third option guys. We have, tier one guys. We have, activity guys. We have all those options to our, disposal. And those guys have been on the ground, in Ukraine since day one. And as far as Israel, they have their own targeting abilities. They have their own aircraft. They have their own munitions. They can do their own fires. They don't need the same things that Ukraine does. But if you look at all these conflicts and the dominoes that are falling right now, you can see the big, ugly, red Winnie the Pooh that's standing behind all of it, and it's China. And the only reason that Taiwan hasn't been taken is because it's such a hard target. It's literally just mountains and urban terrain. And that's why the Chinese don't want to go in there. They're going to have a hard time getting anywhere close to the island. And once they do, they're going to lose all sea access for everything. And that's why these wars have happened. They know that they can't control the sea, no matter how big their navy is with their sailboats or whatever they have. They can't control the Indian Ocean. They can't control the old sea routes that go to Europe and Africa through the Suez Canal. They have to go over land. And that's why all these land wars are happening. I think the fact that we have to have infantry, but you know what? And as much as Chad and Brent will yell at me for this, we don't have the best infantry in the world. We don't. There's infantry that is more highly trained. Maybe they don't have as many, but there are countries that have infantry that are better than ours. But the real strength of the U.S. military lies not in its force-on-force maneuver, battalions and divisions. It's the fact that we have such good force projection. We are the only country in the world with the logistical ability and the air power and the air dominance that we can put even a National Guardsman on the ground, within 48 hours with the tank rolling off of a ship on a dockyard. That is the real strength of the U.S. military. We have, all the technology and everything like that, but that is really the thing that sets us apart from the rest of the world.
Here, Logan. Completely agree. Probably it's a bit of an overstatement here, but to make the point, probably the most valuable aircraft in the U.S. Air Force's inventory is the C-17. What you can do there with that aircraft and stuff is way more than you can do with a B-52 as far as it affecting the political outcome in the world.
Thank you, Les. I actually built those, so I appreciate the vote of confidence. Thank you all very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I just want to mention that, and maybe Chad did too, but I pissed in a porthole from a C-17 over the Himalaya mountains going to Kyrgyzstan into Iraq, or into Afghanistan. So my piss literally sprinkled over the Himalaya.
It's probably still frozen. You know that, right?
I'm sure you created dilapidation, corrosion down the T6 aluminum panels, and someone had to go in there and replace all of that. Caustic piss going out of an airplane at 30,000 feet.
That was pure excellence. That was.
So when global warming finally happens in that area of the Earth thaws, Brents will spring from the ground.
I want to circle back real quick about like my correlation here between how we saw Hamas carry out these attacks to, let's say, drug cartels carrying out those same type of attacks on the U.S. southern border in retaliation for something right down the road, especially if we get a Republican administration in that's a lot more harsher on the southern border, right? Doing what they're supposed to be doing. You know, will we see, or could we see those type of attacks? Because I went camping with my family yesterday, and literally 3 of the exact same type of paragliders that was used in that attack came flying over, and I pointed out to my wife, hey, I was like, hey, that's what those terrorists used to infiltrate in Israel. And it's like, you know, if you saw something, I'm not just limiting it to this, right? But if you saw something flying over like that, like nobody would think twice about that, right? Even if it was coming from the southern border. And I mean, you just think of the asymmetrical warfare that could be played, right? Coming in, a border patrol officer gets paid off, and several semi trucks go through the border checkpoint, loaded down with armed cartel death squads, right? You just can only imagine the type of stuff that could take place on our southern border, from cartels if they wanted to carry out an attack very similar to what we just saw Hamas do in Israel.
Well, I think there's a great historical counterpart to that. I think it was Columbus, New Mexico, Pancho Villa raided, and what happened out of that? The whole Mexican expedition of 1916. And I think we stayed in there about a year and a half looking, never found Pancho Villa, tore up the countryside. Now imagine with all our firepower and capabilities, if the cartel came across the border and fired up downtown San Diego, that would be ugly.
Yeah, I want to circle back to Chad's original point on that. Yes, there can be kinetic attacks on the United States from people like the cartel, but honestly, we have precedent in the last 10 years that have affected U.S. policy and the American people more than any cartel. If you look at the Dakota Access Pipeline event in 2016, 2017, and if you look at the George Floyd riots and the civil disturbance that caused, you would be not surprised to hear that there were foreign actors and non-state actors involved in those things. And were there a lot of deaths that came out of that? Not really. However, did it affect U.S. policy? Very much so. And you don't have to be a, raiding force coming across the border to destroy the legitimacy of the U.S. government, security forces, and U.S. military power or whatever. You have to just find that one guy, whether he's a super Trumper disclosed dude or he's the farthest left infrared commie Jackson Hinkle type person. And if you look at either of those type of people, they are very influenced by foreign propaganda, foreign information operations. And if you see some of them, the people of the extreme left and extreme right in the United States are literally seen in foreign countries with their state-run media. Take Jackson Hinkle, for example, I just brought up. That dude is a literal communist, but he's also in some weird synchronization with like the January 6th type people, and he's on Russian state media. You look at the far right, you look at those guys, the same thing. They're they're in knee deep with foreigners. This is what foreign intelligence services want. The SVR, the North Koreans, the Chinese, everybody. You look at the guy at JBLM that just gave away the secrets. That guy was politically motivated. You just have to find the people in the United States that don't like the United States. And when I talk to, I love freedom and all the amendments are Constitution. However, some people see resistance to tyranny as an opportunity to get something from a foreign power, to fight our government. And those people are just as wrong as a traitor, because those people are fighting at the behest of a foreign government, a foreign intelligence service, and they're influenced by such. People have to understand the difference between resisting oppression from your government and resisting oppression from your government that's sustained and influenced from a foreign power, because at that point you're an enemy. Do you disagree?
Well said, man. No, you're right. You're absolutely right. Well said.
Nailed it.
Yeah, I have no illusions whatsoever that the Chi-Coms had played a part in like the George Floyd riots.
And the flip side of that is we would do it too in any other country given the opportunity. Right? I mean, let's be honest.
As we should.
Let's be honest. Every country does this, right? I mean, on some level or another. So shame on them for doing that. But I shall not live in a glass house either. I'll end up with all of my walls broken down.
Well, it goes to say that's a great tactic to use against Iran. If we have to fight them, let's make sure their insurgents groups are very heavily armed.
Well, we've tried several times. They've had a lot of civil unrest there, where I'm sure we were stoking the fires also, but it hasn't seemed to prevail. They seem to come out on top.
Most insurgencies do fail, but they also bring about a lot of change too.
Great point. You don't see Black Lives Matter stuff anymore. You don't see much George Floyd stuff anymore. Not only did it impact the government, which I think Chad keyed in on, but it impacted corporations across the country. There were not a lot of major corporations that didn't jump on that bandwagon in one way or another, whether it was putting up a black Instagram profile post for a week or something, but they were all over. So it created not just getting the government intervention to take a turn or a change, but even also, on the civilian side, on corporations and whatnot. And of course, that filters down to even employees. There were many companies that would reach out to their employees and say, hey, support this for this reason, support that for that reason. Let's all band together. We're all behind poor Mr. Floyd, whatever the case may be. So these things do have huge impacts, and there's a ton of money behind it as well.
What I would say, Bruce, that you don't see that as much anymore is because all their original communist founders all got a little taste of capitalism, right, with all those donations, and now they've all moved on to mansions and everything else.
Yeah,
they're living their happy capitalist lives now.
Yeah. Because of social media and because of the instant availability of communication and news, we know, most people know now, it was all a bunch of BS, and that they bought into it, and that they were duped on the whole thing. But for the time being, it happened, and it was a real thing, and it will happen again because people by nature are, in my opinion, pretty stupid.
They're not stupid, Bruce. I would disagree and say that just like a misperception that Eastern Europeans have of Americans, a lot of Americans are very highly educated to the fact that they can read. And they can see the mass media, they can see the available information that's given to them from any place. But at the same time, Americans care about what affects them. They care about the gas prices. They care about their sons going to war. They care about if they're going to go to the grocery store and there's going to be fucking corn pops on the shelf. They're going to care about stupid shit like that. Yes, because that is their life. They shouldn't have to worry about being at war. They shouldn't have to worry about that kind of thing. But the fact is that the United States people in general, excluding the military, have not had to experience an invasion. They haven't had to experience being oppressed by a foreign power. And so, yes, they're going to care about those small things. And so, everything that affects an American person in that way is a huge policy opportunity for a foreign country and for an intelligence service, and even for our own security services. They can manipulate and influence things like for just an election, for instance. You see policy changes just happening because an election is coming up. I mean, really, how do all these wars in Taiwan, East China Sea, and Ukraine and Israel, what do they all have in common? I want to see these questions in the chat.
Well, what else we got, fellas? We got 30 mics before we hit a 2-hour mark, so probably start wrapping it up.
Well, one, there's lessons to be learned from this, and we've already touched on one. Is like, be prepared, people. You know, a lot of Israelis would be alive today if they were prepared, if they had better than just one pistol with 50 rounds, but also having some body armor, some communication devices, you know, a plan. A plan would be really good. Plans don't cost much, but they're really good to have. Things like that. So if a situation this arrives, you can respond to a certain extent. Even if your plan is, I'll fight my way to my vehicle and drive away, still a plan. You know, if your thing is to go, oh, I got to get to Aunt Ruth's house because she's all alone and 80 years old, it's still a plan. In your plan, you should have some training. You know, just because you own the rifle in the case of ammo doesn't give you any proficiency with it. It confers no expertise to you. You have to go out, you have to train. And if you have a plan with your buddies and everything, get together with your buddies. Don't just talk about it on the phone or over a beer after meeting up after work one day. Go practice your plan.
Thanks, Les. That's absolutely right. And I think that one of the bigger problems was that many Israelis did have a plan. I was watching some interviews today on some Israelis, and they said, yeah, they said we went into our safe room and we were all hiding in our safe room, and the terrorists blew the door off the safe room and came in and grabbed us and drug us out. Yeah, I mean, that was a shit plan. Like, you didn't think that through, really. And I don't blame them, okay? Not everybody pays attention to this stuff every day like we do. A lot of people, they go by a notification they get from their government. We all saw this during COVID more than anything. Government goes, hey, if you wear a paper mask, you're going to be fine. Everything will be great. And they're like, okay, well, that's what they said. It must be true. That's what they told us. That's what we pay them to do. And we know now it was freaking garbage. Same thing with these Israelis. I guarantee you that the government mindset was, hey, have a safe room. There's probably a spec for the door that has to be on it. And it has to be able to handle so many pounds of pressure or so many kicks from a size 9 shoe or whatever the case may be. And they're like, we're up to spec. So we're safe. We go in here, nothing can get to us. No, it takes more than that. You need to be able to, one, yes, defend yourself. And I think back to us Americans, one of the biggest problems, we've said this in many other streams before, not even related to this topic or topics like this, simply having a rifle and a few mags of ammo, that's not enough. I know the American mindset, for whatever reason, makes you think that tool is the most important thing that you can have, and you've got to get that first. It's not. It's the mindset. It's one, not only knowing how to use it and use it proficiently, but most importantly, understanding what taking a life really looks like. Not that John Wayne shit from the 1950s on TV, but what destroying a human body, punching holes through it at 3,000 feet per second really looks like. And the noises that they make and the smells that will come off of them and the destruction that you're going to do to that human life, what that really looks like, and being able to be prepared to do that to another person and keep your mind clear enough that you can do it over and over again and continue to protect yourself and your family and put up a decent defense of your home. And also accepting the fact that you're not going to negotiate your way out of that and that you're probably not going to survive that, but you can take down quite a few of them before they get you. If you've got that mindset and everybody in your community's got that mindset, it'll be very difficult for your community to be taken. But if you think you're going to lock yourself in a safe room and pray to whatever God you've got and everything's going to be okay, you're going to end up just like a lot of Jews ended up on Sunday.
We got something to follow that up. That was pretty well spoken, especially the size 9 shoe resistance.
Well, it's also to kind of tack on to what Bruce said. The Israelis probably did listen to their government, but for 20 years, the threat has been a rocket. The safe room was designed to defend them against a rocket. There used to be a time when the PLO did attack with firearms, and Israel got pretty effective at countering it by arming their teachers. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It was a thing in the early 60s. Attack the school bus, attack the schoolroom, attack the teachers on the outing. And they armed the teachers, and it suddenly didn't become a thing. The kibbutzniks had defensive plans for their little kibbutzes, guard shifts and like that. And then it became counterproductive for the PLO to attack the kibbutzes. And that went away. And then the roadside bomb and then the rocket came in because Israel didn't really have a defense against that. So, yeah, their safe room is probably really good about protecting you when the rockets come. Nobody's thought about this threat for a while. And I guarantee you there'll be changes about the way a safe room is built, because there probably is a spec for it.
All I'm going to say is just from an outside perspective, U.S. looking at this, the lessons we're going to take away from watching the conflict in Ukraine take place, as well as presumably Israelis going into urban fighting in modern era, there's going to be a lot of lesson learned and a lot of new age TTPs. So I hope those in the U.S. military that are sitting in high places are going to be taking copious notes, because what we're seeing going on right here, 2022, 2023 is just eye-opening and just modern warfare, and it's just evolving at an incredible pace.
It's like, Brent, how many times have you ran up and down the stairs for training? You know what I mean? Like urban complex training. What is the best way to clear a stairwell? To call in an aircraft, some platform, and have a JDAM friggin' drop something on it, destroy the building. That's the best way to clear a stairwell. In this instance, I don't think that that's going to happen. I think that they're going to have to physically take Gaza if they want to take it. And there's just too many civilians on the battlefield, and if they kill every single civilian in Gaza, it's not going to meet the objectives of the actual Israeli military. Maybe the Israeli people will be happy about it, but not. But when I look at what Americans can take away from this is an armed, prepared citizen. Look at the people who have survived this attack in Israel. The people that were organized, maybe not necessarily the best trained people, but they were organized. The people that were in their community buildings, their Jewish community centers, that were armed and ready for this kind of thing to happen. They all came together in large groups and defended themselves. If you look at the Ukrainians, who survived the initial onslaught of the invasion? It wasn't the military. It was the old ladies who had jarred their pickles and sallow and everything for years and had all that food ready for them to survive with nothing, The guys in Kharkiv who banded together that weren't military trained, but they were all friends in a soccer fan club. And they became the deadliest fighting force on the battlefield today in Ukraine. Really, you just have to organize yourselves. You have to be prepared. And just like Hamas has planned to do, you can go from literally, guys in pajamas with sandals on with a cigarette hanging out of the side of your mouth to a significantly trained and equipped force that conduct operations at a really a Western standard, if I can say so. I think that you can really take anybody with enough motivation and create a fighting force. And we have to look at the U.S. Citizens as I can't remember who said it before. I think it was Les, but he was talking about how militias are going to play a huge role going forward in this era of conflicts, because Standing armies are going to be held in reserve as a show of force, as a deterrent, and the militias are going to be the ones who fight the wars.
Yeah, to add on to my earlier comments, if you're there hoarding gear, you've gone out, you bought your rifle, your case of ammo, a couple mags, and everything, go buy an extra set. Because I know everybody on this panel has probably encountered, like the start of COVID, for example, where you got that person who made fun of all your guns and then came up to you and asked, "Hey, where can I get a gun?" You know, always have that. And as you're trying to bring people into your group, have that extra set of loaner gear.
All right, guys, I think we're at a nice culminating point. I'm going to start the round robin. So we can just go around. If you got a YouTube channel, Instagram page, whatever is applicable to you, go ahead and pimp it. And then also final thoughts. So going clockwise. Good Chad. You got the con.
All right, so I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I'm a little pessimistic about a super heavy-handed response from Israel to the Gaza situation. I don't see this conflict ending in favor of either side. It will probably end fairly quickly. Israel will probably have a big response, but I don't see them leveling Gaza. But they do have to react, as Bruce said earlier on. But it does have to be careful, especially since organizations like our leftist media tend to focus on their every move. Hamas efforts probably won't change anything. It's minute stuff. In the end, the cycle will repeat itself. I'm really looking at this conflict with, what are the strategic implications for America specifically, especially with regard to the Chinese threat. So, but this conflict is only a few days old, and as I'm sure most of you will be watching closely. I don't have a YouTube channel, but I do want to pimp a book. If you guys are not familiar with Sean McFate, The New Rules of War, this guy has been called the new Sun Tzu and the new Clausewitz. He's a military scholar. This is a fantastic book. If you're interested in military science, I would highly, highly recommend it. This is about basically how wars of the future are no longer going to be conventional. A lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, but again, highly recommended. That's all I got.
All right, guys. Good discussion. I don't know where we're at on all of the chat comments, but it's got to be a pretty high number because I know we've been blowing through them. So you guys have done a great job of being interactive here. It's great seeing Logan on. It was actually my first time interacting with him. I think he brings a wealth of knowledge to the whole stream. And not to pick on him too much, but I thought the comments were hilarious. Where one guy's like, "I can't take this Logan dude seriously." And then the next guy's like, he's the hottest thing since sliced bread. So I'm not sure what I guess what does that mean? We have an unbelievably diverse group of guys watching the stream and the chat. So thank you, Brent, for that. Look, I've said probably all I need to say on this thing that's unfolding. We'll definitely be visiting it again. It's not going to go away next week. This is going to be going on for a while. I think that the real question is, I think every conflict has a window, and as time goes on, because of communications, the window gets smaller and smaller and smaller. This is going to be all you're going to hear on the news, the U.S. news, that is, media news, is go Israel, go Israel, go Israel, until Israel goes. And then you start being flooded with 4K cell phone video of babies and little girls being pulled from rubble where their bodies have been crushed and are covered in dust. And you don't see anything but a powdered child with a little blood running off of them. And eventually, pretty quickly, the U.S. is going to start to not have the stomach to continue to see that. So I think that this goes a lot to what both Chad and Logan said about whether this is going to be a long-term fight or a short-term fight. There is a window, and I don't know what the window is, and I don't know how well that those images can be contained to ensure that the money flows in through Congress, gets us supporting Israel, which we will do, and then helps them to take the war to Palestine, which we will support. But for how long, I don't know. I'm here just like you guys. I'm just a spectator. I'm just learning from this new conflict, just like I have all the past conflicts. So I'll continue to monitor it like you are. We'll come back in a few weeks and see how many of these things we were right about and what things we were wrong about. But that's all I got for tonight. Boomer Jr. out.
Well, I think the IDF has telegraphed a little bit of what they're going to do, as they said they're going to lay siege to Gaza. Now, that can mean a lot of different things, but they're going to cut off the food, the water, everything in and out. They've already cut the electricity. Whether they choose to go in, I think they will. What they do once they get in there, that remains to be seen. The conflict will drag on for a long time. It'll be in phases. The active combat phase probably going to be shorter. The siege phase will be quite long. When you say you're going to siege something, you're indicating and telling everybody you're in it for the long haul. As for what's coming up on my YouTube channel, I'm finally, this Friday, will be putting out my One Shepherd video from the spring semester. Taking a while to work on that and get it out. And the first video of Series 3 will be out, so please tune in and check that out.
Gentlemen, as you know from just talking to me a couple of times, I really just care about U.S. interests no matter where they lie in the world. But I will end with a question. What is the greatest weakness of Americans in any conflict in the past 100 years? Our education. We haven't been prepared for the conflicts that we've had in the last 100 years, and we've done pretty badly at the beginning of almost all of them. And we really need to rectify that. Especially now that we have such access to such good lessons learned. We're discussing things like in the stream, we're reading, we're looking at the news, we're looking at other warriors that are fighting now. Educate yourself. Read Resistance to Tyranny. Read Total Resistance. Read War of the Flea. Read Rommel's Attack. Read all the military things, the regular military things you can read. And also organize yourself. Not in the sense of organizing a militia, but just organize yourselves as a community. That's what really makes a difference. Prepare your food. Prepare your stores of defensive things. You're just, like the guy said, you're just an ordinary man. You're supposed to protect your family. You're supposed to protect what's in your sphere of influence. Don't think about anything outside of your community or your family. What you need to focus on is that. And once you educate yourself and you're prepared for these things, then you'll be one of those survivors. And you'll really be the guy that's always watching.
Logan, what's your Instagram handle for people?
Oh, yeah. Ghost of Sashimi, you can check me out on Instagram.
All right, guys. I want to thank all the gentlemen that jumped on the panel tonight. This was an interesting conversation. I'm glad we had it. And yeah, I mean, the next few days are going to be intense watching. I personally think Israel is probably going to take the gloves off and go full force in there. I watched the Israeli UN ambassador today. He pretty much made the exact point that Bruce just said. He went through and showed a bunch of videos of some of the atrocities that were committed, and then he's like, hey, you guys, as soon as we kick off, you guys are going to be up here showing the pictures of dead women and children that were casualties of war, and you guys are going to turn against us. Just remember this, and all that I think is leading to a massive undertaking by the Israelis. So that's where I'm sitting on that. That's going to be my prediction. We'll see in the coming days. I think with the hostages in play, I think Israel's going to move quick. And my, I hate to say this, but what Logan brought up earlier, like Fallujah times fucking 100, it's probably going to be that, right? I think they're going to capitalize on the opportunity to move in there and just absolutely clear out that place of Hamas, their weapons caches, their tunnels. They're going to do everything they can. They have their people behind them. So that's what I see happening in the next few days for sure. As far as my channel is concerned, I've got a few things coming down the pipe. I have a new video coming out very shortly over an experimental Marine Corps flak that was introduced during the Vietnam War that was able to take essentially SAPI plates, ceramic plates that were capable of stopping 7.62 by 39 type rounds. And this is something that came out. It was never implemented in Vietnam to my knowledge, but it's a very interesting piece of gear. So those of you guys that are gear fanatics, historical gear fanatics, that's going to be coming out very shortly. So that's what I got in the pipe, guys. Does anybody have any saved rounds?
Let's go, Brandon.
I think we made it through here without any sex robot references too.
No,
where's
Doc.
Doc?
No, Doc.
Yeah,
A
where's
lot of
Doc?
guys have been asking, where's Doc go? Speaking of sex robots, he is out testing sex robots as we speak. He got a bottle of blue pills. He is writing a book and doing YouTube videos. So you guys stay tuned for that. Good stuff coming out of that.
All right, guys. Keep fighting the good fight. See you on the next one.